Now, Elijah hears this, and then he says to the king, chapter 7, verse 1, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says, about this time tomorrow, the seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." Tomorrow, for practically no money at all, we'll be able to buy flour and barley. The same price that was being paid for donkey's heads will buy you a tremendous amount of flour. Now, that sounds like pretty good news, doesn't it? I think that'd be like, yes, finally. But you know, have you ever talked to people who are in despair or in discouragement, and you try to encourage them and give them a word of encouragement, and they just say, "Yeah, right. Yeah, I've heard that before. That'll never be." They get to that point that you really can't do anything or say anything to encourage them. So when the king hears this, I think he seems to be kind of neutral on it. It doesn't really do anything. But look what this officer near him, I think he expresses what everybody's thinking. Verse 2. "The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, 'Look, even if the Lord should open up the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?'" In other words, he said, this will never happen. Have you not seen what's going on outside? This is foolish talk. You're just getting people's expectations and hopes up for no reason. "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elijah, "but you will not eat any of it." Elijah says, you'll live to see this day happen tomorrow, but you will not have any of the food that is flowing in the city. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Now here's an interesting contrast. You have the king of Israel who's lost all faith, lost all hope, fallen into despair, and now we're told of 4 other guys who also had gotten to the point of where hope could be lost. Verse 3. "Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, 'Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die.'" Now, think about that. What I love about this story, here's you've got the king of Israel who's had everything all his life. He's been raised in opulence, raised in the palace, never wanted for anything, and I will guarantee you during most of this famine, he has not gone hungry because he's had the king's treasures, the storehouse, to live off of. Here's that guy. On the other end of the spectrum, you have 4 lepers. You can't be any lower in society than a leper. In fact, where were the lepers? They're sitting right at the edge of the city in the gate because lepers were not supposed to be in proximity to non-lepers because they would make Jews unclean according to the law. In fact, if a leper was coming down the road and he saw people ahead of him, he had to yell out, "Unclean! Unclean!" to give those people warning, to give him a wide berth. So these 4 guys who have never had anything, never been anything, the dregs of society, they're sitting there, and probably in all the kingdom, they're the only ones that's showing any sense whatsoever. Because they said, you know what? This is a hopeless situation. Let's assess where we are. Did you pick that up? So they said, okay, what would our options be? One of them says, well, let's see. We could sit right where we are and do nothing. Been sitting here, keep sitting here, die here. That's one option. Another one says, hey, we could go in the city, take the risk. After all, I mean, it's in chaos anyway. We could go in the city where there's no food, and we can die there. And the other one says, hey, why don't we go surrender to the enemy? Now, on face value, that sounds like a pretty desperate measure, doesn't it? There's no desperation to just sitting there, right? There's no desperate measure being taken. No change in the activity. We're just going to keep sitting here. That'd be like dropping me in the Amazon, and I would say, "Oh, I'm not going to eat that. That's nasty. I can't eat that," and just, refuse to eat all the food that Bear eats. Well, they said we could just sit here, like we've been doing, take no action. We could go into the city. Well, in good days, that might have been more desperate, but it's not desperate now. Who in the city really cares if they get near a leper? Can you imagine that if you're in the city with no food and a leper comes around? Do you think you're going to change your focus to, oh, here comes a leper, he can't be in here, let's get rid of him? They've given up. And so they said, well, why don't we take a desperate action? Why don't we go surrender to the enemy? Now, I would just love to have seen that. I really would. I would love to have been in the enemy camp and seen these 4 lepers coming. And the enemy said, hey, there's 4 guys coming. And they're probably yelling, unclean, because that's what they're used to yelling, unclean. And they get up there, we're here to surrender. What are you, the Jewish army? Are you the army of Israel? No, we're all that's left, we're here. And their hope was, there's 2 possibilities to that action, 2 possible recourses. One is, in surrendering, they would be given food. Throw them in jail, throw them in prison, give them some food. Or, on the other hand, the enemy could do what? Kill them, which is the same outcome if they stayed. They assessed the situation. They considered the possible actions that they could take, and then they took the risk. So, they start down the road. Verse 5, at dusk. Now, what I like about that, it tells me this probably was quite a long debate they had, And they finally got consensus. Okay, yeah, we're all going to go. So at dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. Now this is interesting. While the lepers are there having this discussion about what shall we do, shall we stay here, go inside, surrender to the enemy, God is causing the Arameans at their base camp to hear thundering hooves, the sound of thundering hooves. Like this vast army is coming over the plains, marching toward them. And they said, we got to get out of here. This is not going right. It's all over for us. So when will they be here? Well, from the sound, they're not far off. Well, we better just skedaddle. Y'all know that word skedaddle, don't you? We got to get out of here real quick. And so they just take off and leave everything behind. So here they are, they're fleeing, and the only army that's coming is 4 lepers. And so these 4 lepers wander into the camp. Can you picture this scene? They're looking for somebody to surrender to. Who can we surrender to? Have you found anybody yet? No, I've been all over here. There's nobody there. They're wandering around with their hands up. We give up. We surrender. We surrender. And so they go through all the camp and they can't find anybody to surrender to. This desperate action they've taken is working out pretty good, isn't it?